remembering with biostimulants, it's usually you're using a very small quantity of the product, and it's not direct fertility. It's some indirect way that the plant is benefiting from this biostimulant. You're growing in a sterile soil, you may not have the microbial population that's going to trigger this or that or whatever. But then you can add something like a salicylic acid, and it's going to trigger that same pathway that a microbe could have. So nature doesn't rely only one way of getting the job done.
What amino acids can you actually purchase commercially at your local hydroponic store? I think you mentioned a few of them there, but I wanted to just bring it up to the surface.
But we know that Bacillus subtilis strains, some work as ways of making roots grow more, right? Because they essentially can help the plant produce far more cytokinins and auxins, and so you get a lot more root mass.
Did you know microbes and amino acids are biostimulants? Well, in this video, you're going to get into it with Mark Bowell and the rest of the team on Perfect Gardens TV. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. And if you haven't checked us out on Instagram and Facebook, or checked out our $2.99 membership, where there's over 115 growers ready and willing to assist you through your growing practices, well, I highly recommend to do so. Let's go and get into it, guys.
Make sure to hit the join button on the bottom of every video. Thank you, Av, so much for coming back on the channel and talking about biostimulants. We had such a wonderful conversation around plant extracts and carbon sources, and we would like to cover why are amino acids and microbials biostimulants, and kind of just tie it all in together for everyone. Would that be okay?
Sounds great. Yeah. Great to see you, Hayes and Dave and Mark. Nice to be back.
You as well. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
So why are amino acids biostimulants? I mean, it just seems like these few categories, these 5 categories, it kind of like encompasses everything as a biostimulant, it seems like, besides fertilizers, of course.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times when we think of amino acids, we are often thinking about using them as fertilizers, right? So if we think about perhaps using soy-based amino acids, we think of that as a good fertilizer source. It might be 600, 900, 1400. You can get higher grades of these soy-based amino acids. But remembering with biostimulants, it's usually you're using a very small quantity of the product, and it's not direct fertility. It's some indirect way that the plant is benefiting from this biostimulant. So whether we're using amino acids, and oftentimes when we look at this group, there's going to be these protein hydrolysates, some amino acids, some N-nitrogen containing products, right? Those are often listed as all of these are biostimulants. What's interesting about them is that for the most part, they will enhance nutrient uptake. So it's not necessarily the nutrients that are in that biostimulant, but they will actually increase other nutrients coming in. And, we really don't fully understand how nutrients enter into the plant cell. We keep learning new ways that plants are doing this. But one of the ways that we know that if we use something like a fish hydrolysate, that's got amino acids in it. And, for some of us, we just want that amino acid because we know that amino acids are a nicer form of nitrogen once you get into that vegetative, late veg phase and entering into flowering. You want to move away from nitrate nitrogen. You want amino acids, more ammonium-based nitrogen. But that's the fertility part of it. In terms of a biostimulant, we know that it can actually open up certain channels within the cell wall, and you can actually bring in other nutrients, specifically calcium. And what we found that glycine and lysine, these two amino acids, they will help increase calcium uptake.
So real fast, maybe I should have asked this question in the beginning. Could you help me understand what exactly is an amino acid? Because you got right in there and you said, nitrogen's an amino acid, right?
No, nitrogen would be a building block so we go from, nitrogen, then we form peptides. You'll have these, base pairs that kind of form into peptides. These peptides will then form into amino acids. Amino acids will then turn into proteins.
Tell me the building blocks to protein.
Tell me if this is correct. I thought it's amino acids, peptides, then proteins, correct?
Yeah, it could be. You get amino acids, amino acids forming peptides, peptides forming proteins.
And so
there's essential amino acids too, like for humans that actually help build the protein.
So I'm
not sure if it's the same in that.
what is an amino acid exactly then?
It's usually just referred to as a nitrogen containing molecule, right? And we have some, as Hayes was referring to, as essential amino acids, and then there's probably some non-essential amino acids that are still valuable in building proteins. But what our bodies need, I think there are 22 of them or something. There's
21, 22 of them. They're right about 20.
Yeah, and it's always hard for some folks who are either on a vegan diet or a vegetarian diet to be able to access all of those. And so they have to have a wider variety to ensure that they are getting all of their essential amino acids. And so that's one of the reasons why we like to use amino acids as a bit of a fertility source, is that it is already taking that whole process of when we bring in nitrogen, that nitrogen that has to be converted into an amino acid then is converted into proteins. If you can cheat and jump a couple of steps by bringing in an amino acid right into the plant, well, then you save some energy. Is this making sense? And once again, that was the fertility aspect of amino acids. As a biostimulant, we do find, and here's an example of a biostimulant that's an amino acid. It's found predominantly in soy, but you can also find a very similar amino acid in kelp, and it's called a betaine, betaine, glycine betaine, and I could be mispronouncing that. It could be betaine. I have no idea, but that's an amino acid that isn't directly related to increasing nutrient uptake, but it really helps address abiotic stress. So if you're undergoing some drought stress, perhaps some salt stress, that's where that amino acid can help carry your plant through those stressful times.
I was just going to mention that.
And how do you pronounce it, Hayes?
It's betaine. It helps open up your vascular systems and stuff like that. Helps with your lungs and everything for when you want to breathe. So a lot of people do that before triathlons and stuff with beet juice. But yeah, from what he was saying is he found it higher in quantities in wheat germ. But it's funny because they named it betaine or betaine after beets because they found it in betaine or in beets. Right. And they also, other term is beta vulgaris in the supplement industry. That's how I learned about it. I thought it was cool that you brought it up.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why we like to eat sprouts and or harvest things that are like wheat germ, wheatgrass, all of that early on. A lot of those enzymes are triggering off, and you'll have higher levels of enzymes, which are essentially, having large amounts of amino acids present.
I guess it had similar effects to like what it does in humans too. So it like helps you aid in your growth and become stronger and your immune system as well. Just like what you're saying.
And I think that's in general, when we look at biostimulants, whether it's, going back to humic and fulvic acids or chitin or kelp extracts, seaweed extracts, a lot of times they are addressing a lot of the same issues where it's either increasing nutrient uptake or stimulating the immune system in some way to address whatever stresses you might be.
So are these just, in a sense, different conduits affecting that same trigger system that's causing the plant to produce phytoalexins within itself, where it's like triggering the salicylic response, or where I know there's an actual response that the plant has to where it starts triggering actual jasmonic pathways or salicylic pathways within itself to where it starts producing those phytoalexins. That's what I'm getting.
Yeah. I mean, it's I'd be very similar to us, taking a vaccine or something where it may trigger our immune system to get heightened and more aware of something. And so we have that induced systemic resistance pathways, and we have the systemic acquired resistance. And within those, the salicylic acid pathway and the jasmonic acid pathway are two pathways of the systemic acquired resistance. And that's why we will use something like aloe vera or willow, because or even a monosalicylic acid, because it's got that salicylic acid and it's going to trigger that pathway. Yeah, I think it's just important to recognize that those biostimulants are responding to the way that these plants and these microbes in the soil, they've evolved for millions of years. And one thing nature does so well is have redundancies. So if, for example, you're growing in a sterile soil, you may not have the microbial population that's going to trigger this or that or whatever. But then you can add something like a salicylic acid, and it's going to trigger that same pathway that a microbe could have, right? So nature doesn't rely only one way of getting the job done. You know, she's got so many different venues that are probably triggering a plant to respond the same way that you know, a kelp extract might trigger it, or an amino acid, or a vitamin, or a terpene, for example.
Cool you say like that, because it's almost like only certain genetic traits are coming out from the plant if it's in like a synthetic environment, like in aeroponics. So like you're saying, it's not going to be able to have that experience to be able to take up those types of organic. That's why I think organics are a bit different in a sense at the end, because I've always been trying to figure that out. And I believe biostimulants are the thing that makes organics different than stimulants in a taste sense and all of that. Like why people ask why it's better. I believe it's the biostimulant effect that you can't get from simple NPK bottles that are, I mean, those can work to a sense, but it's the biostimulants that create that actual difference that like Harley Smith was talking about too. It's like putting a key in a lock and you're unlocking certain genetic responses from that plant, and it's able to express itself into its full potential.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And I mean, you know, coming out of the living soil bias, I always think living soil is going to give me that extra advantage, and my plants look very different than if I was growing in a hydroponics system. That being said, I think, Hayes, what you've commented on is what I think hydroponic growers can go towards, right? Is that if they just went with NPK, they're going to have probably a lesser looking plant, just not going to look right, may not taste right. But if they start using these biostimulants, I think that they are unleashing more of the genetics of that plant, and hopefully getting, you know, the flavonoids, the sterols, the phytoalexins, the other antioxidants, as well as, of course, the cannabinoids and terpenes that we want.
I have actually really enjoyed listening to that. One question: what amino acids can you actually purchase commercially at your local hydroponic store? You know, I think you mentioned a few of them there, but I wanted to just bring it up to the surface.
I think there's a lot of isolation of amino acids will come from what product that they're derived from. So a lot of times you'll buy soy-based amino acids. Occasionally you may be able to get some canola-based amino acids. Other people may have some kelp-based amino acids. Other than that, I mean, I do believe NPK, like raw, they do sell something called an amino acid. Usually for myself, what I look for as an amino acid are examples like, I know that my kelp extract will have amino acids. I know that my soy meal will have amino acid. I know that my organic canola meal will have amino acids in it. I know that my fish hydrolysate will have amino acids. And so that's what I'm kind of looking for. I'm looking for something a little bit broader than maybe just specifically buying a glycine betaine, right? You know, which I mean, it could be on the market. I'm just not aware of that as a product line. Oftentimes, I'd rather throw the shopping cart in there and hope that the plant will do what it needs. But I am looking for those products that have amino acids. So kelp, soy, you know, fish hydrolysates, other protein hydrolysates would also have those. There's some hydrolysates that are derived from animals, some that are derived from plants. I prefer using plants.
Alfalfa meal as well, right?
Which one?
Alfalfa meal.
Oh yeah, it should have some amino acids, right? It's a high protein.
Anything organic would have some. There's some that are more bioaccumulative of amino acids within themselves.
And I find too that it's just really interesting. You kind of go on the market and they isolate these amino acids down, give them back to you, but it sounds like there might be between 3 and 5 available on the market. But we just talked about earlier on, there's 20 to 22 amino acids that we need. As human beings, plants, again, they probably need the same because we're so similar. I could be wrong. Obviously more one than other probably. But you really just cannot get the full show without the microbes. I mean, the microbes is what's going to produce all of your amino acids. You know, if you go outside of that, like you go in hydroponics, when I look at this and I took a step back as you guys were talking, if I replaced biostimulant with compost, it would seem like this is the same thing. You're fermenting your extracts or composting them. You know, your carbon source, your amino acids, or microbes, same thing. It just seems like this is a compost bin.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, and like we mentioned before, nature has a lot of built-in redundancies, right? Mm-hmm. So compost is definitely a biostimulant. There's no question about it. It's going to trigger as many of these pathways that we've talked about in nutrient uptake, addressing abiotic stresses, increasing root growth, all of those things. Compost can do all that. It's just at times we may use something like a chitin, it's very specific. We know that chitin, for the most part, is going to trigger some type of response in that plant that is going to stimulate the systemic acquired resistance, right? So we know very specifically we do that. And when we come to microbes, if we were to jump into talking about microbes, we know that, yes, a compost is going to have thousands of different species of microbes in it, and they can help the plant in a myriad of ways. Or we can take a particular strain of Bacillus pumilus, and we know that that is going to stimulate lateral root production. Or a Bacillus subtilis that's going to work as a nice particular strain of Bacillus subtilis is going to address some type of root pathogen. And that's where it gets very specific.
Probably not on this video, but I think Dave actually created a PowerPoint for us to go over together, all of us, on all the different microbes they're selling on the market. And we wanted to like go one by one. Do you know all those bacteria and fungi that well, where we could look at it specifically and say what its intended purpose or use for?
One of the biggest challenges would come from the fact that we'll use a term like Pseudomonas, or on the bottles, it may just list something like a Pseudomonas species, right? Or Bacillus subtilis, unless it gives you that specific strain name, and they might try to keep that a little proprietary. It depends on what they actually have to put on the labels. If a certain state required you to actually name the specific strain, then you'd reveal that. But we know that Bacillus subtilis strains, some work as ways of making roots grow more, right? Because they essentially can help the plant produce far more cytokinins and auxins, and so you get a lot more root mass. Another Bacillus subtilis strain is going to work amazingly well at combating fusarium, right? It's most likely two different strains. We get other Bacillus subtilis strains that'll help cycle phosphorus better or nitrogen better. So we would have very general comments. These Pseudomonas species or Pseudomonas species can help address abiotic stresses or something like that, but it probably wouldn't get down to a very specific definition of exactly what that strain in that bottle is doing.
The other day I went into a hydroponics store and I saw the product Bloomblastic, and we were having a conversation with Harley around biostimulants. And you guys know the product Bloomblastic, right?
I don't know exactly what's in it, no.
It's like a $1,000 gallon, but they say it's a biostimulant. And I didn't know what's like biostimulant specifically, how you make them, until Hayes created his 2-minute Instagram video, and he showed us, it's just basically different types of fruit fermented, and it just piles into this ooze, and then from there you figure out how much you need to dilute it. And I found it to be really interesting.
Take the ethanol out.
Yeah, you got to take the ethanol out. But besides that, I found that to just be really interesting on just really being able to go behind the veil in this industry, because the value of the product is dramatically decreasing. And if the farmers want to stay competitive and stay in the industry, they got to figure out how to do these things themselves to increase quality and reduce overall cost.
And it is great. I mean, not everyone has access to go out there and harvest, stormcast kelp, but they probably have the access to, maybe get things like alfalfa or get eggshells or get lobster shells or something like that. They can start making a lot of their own products that way. But compost in general, compost is a great source of a lot of these biostimulants. So then you can use a really amazing source of compost and then either use it as compost, where you're going to get thousands of species, or you can make a compost extract where you may get 500 species, or you can make a compost tea, which you might get 100 species. And that's a good way of benefiting from probably I think in the realm of biostimulants right now, the majority of biostimulants are probably humic and fulvic acids, followed by probably seaweed extracts, and then microbials are coming in probably in third there as biostimulants that are coming up on the shelf. And if you're trying to do it a lot yourself, then compost teas, compost extracts are a good way of introducing those.
You mentioned something right before that. You said that your compost bin will have thousands of species, then Biostimulants store has a few hundred, and then your tea only has a couple hundred. What?
I mean, it was more.
Is that in general?
No, sorry, that was more about the ratios that,
Oh, ratios.
Your compost is going to be the most robust. If it's done well, if it's cured well, whatever, you should have the most robust amount of species in it. As you start selecting by doing an extract, for example, if you start doing a compost extract and you add maybe some humic acid or a kelp extract or a fish hydrolysate to that extract, and you bubble it for 10-15 minutes or an hour, of course you're selecting which microbes are going to do well if there's some extra, fish hydrolysate and whatever, and you reduce those numbers. If you bubble your compost tea for 48 hours, you've definitely selected which ones can really thrive in that environment. And depending on what your oxygen levels are, you're going to have fewer and fewer species.
Wow, so that's incredibly interesting. I never thought about it. So you're telling me that standard, okay, brew for 24 to 48 hours, 72 hours, that entire time, I mean, we're changing the microbial species, some to being more dominant, some to being less dominant or not even exist. So is there any value in brewing a tea for only a couple hours?
Yeah, and that would arguably be an extract, in my opinion. That's where you're still trying to not necessarily significantly increase your microbial populations, but you are stimulating enough of it to increase in some numbers. But that whole action will most likely favor certain species to do better than others, right? And they'll come to the forefront. Especially if you are adding things like, sometimes in a compost extract, I will add humic acid, kelp extract, and a fish hydrolysate, and then perhaps a little bit, as Hayes was mentioning, there's certain times that I will add sugar. I don't add sugar all the time. I will add sugar very early in the plant's life at, sort of time of rooting, at time of transition, and then in the last 2 weeks of flower. Those are the only 3 times that I would actually add something like a molasses. And if you throw that into a compost extract, of course, you're going to highly shift the population of species.
Wow, this is absolutely interesting. I really appreciate everything. Guys, do you guys have any final questions on this topic?
I guess I was just going to, just mention again, when you're thinking about biostimulants, and it is so important to remember that less is more, right? And that's why, Hayes, your comments, I hope I didn't get across that to me, compost is more of a biostimulant because, much of the compost I see is like a 100, or maybe a 101 or something like that. So it's not a lot of fertility there. So how is it really benefiting the plant? Probably in these ways of increasing nutrient uptake.
I was thinking compost, it's a little bit less controlled because people are putting their scraps in there. They're not going out and getting these straight from the source. Like they're not pulling it right off in the mornings and stuff when there's good biological activity within the leaves and stuff like that, because there's still dew on the plants. So that means there's still at least some biological activities going on within the plant on the leaf. And then you're able to pull those in I don't know, it seems cool. It just seems more controlled too, because sorry.
I was just gonna say, I'm so elitist when it comes to compost. I might make my own compost and that goes into like a garden bed. But when I'm growing in my garden, like for cannabis, I'm buying my compost from somebody who knows how to really do it, right? Yeah. And oftentimes it's going to be even worm castings at that. So yeah, no, I know what I'm good at, and I leave the professional stuff to those who actually make good compost or worm castings. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on the channel and breaking down a little bit more about biostimulants. Remember, guys, only on Perfect Gardens TV. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Have a great grow, everyone. You described the methodology I always talk to people about is you can either go faster or you can improve the situation, right? It's like,
if we can create just the right amount of healthy stress, the plants are going to reward us.